Judge Kenneth Bell has denied motion for preliminary injunction for 2011 in Front Row Motorsports, and they will lose their charter status through the remainder of 2025. And Daniel Suarez is one of the favorites to potentially replace Justin Haley at Spire Motorsports in 2026. What's going on, guys? It's Daniel, and welcome back to our video. We got some NASCAR and other motorsports stories discussed here today on the channel. Let's go ahead and just jump straight into those really quickly. We're first going to take a look at a ton of paint schemes that have been revealed over the course of the last couple days. Let's go ahead and just jump straight into those really quickly. The first paint scheme we're taking a look at is Bubba Wallace's 2025 Robin Hood scheme that we'll see in a couple races at the end of this year. Looks very similar to the Corey Heim scheme that we've seen in a couple races so far this year. I gotta say, I do like this car quite a bit. I like the yellowish and the black number they've got. It looks solid. Looking forward to seeing on the racetrack this year. The next paint scheme we're taking a look at is LeVar Scott's 2025 Fox Tekka scheme that we'll see this weekend at Gateway. Honestly, I like the look of this car, to be honest. I love the look of it. I love the black. I like the white on it. It does look pretty good. Looking forward to seeing on the racetrack at Gateway. The next paint scheme we're taking a look at is Parker Retzlaff's 2025 Visual Pack scheme that I believe we're going to see this weekend at Gateway. We have, of course, seen this car a couple times this year, but different looks to it throughout the season. I think this one actually looks solid. Looking forward to seeing on the racetrack at Gateway. The next paint scheme we're taking a look at is Daniel Hemrick's 2025 Action Industry scheme that we'll see in the Xfinity Series race at Gateway. Looks very similar to one that Christian Eckes had. Looks very similar to one that AJ Allmendinger's had in Cup throughout the year. I think it looks decent. Looking forward to seeing on the racetrack at Gateway. The next paint scheme we're taking a look at is Todd Gilliland's 2025 Morton building scheme that we'll see this weekend at Gateway. This is one of the best front row motorsports schemes I think we've seen so far this year. The colors on it look really incredible. The Morton building cars have always looked really good with a lot of different drivers. This one's no exception. It looks great. Looking forward to seeing the racetrack this weekend at Gateway. The next paint scheme we're taking a look at is Christopher Bell's DeWalt Keeley scheme that we'll see this weekend at Gateway. Honestly, I think this car actually looks decent in my opinion. The only difference is you got the Keeley Industries on the front of the car. It looks decent. Looking forward to on the racetrack this week. The next paint scheme we're taking a look at is Brendan Poole's 2025 ARS construction scheme that I believe we're going to see this weekend at Gateway. Honestly, I think this actually looks pretty good in my opinion. I think that we've seen a lot of really nice looking Alpha Prime Racing cars this year. It does look solid for sure. Looking forward to the racetrack this week. The next paint scheme we're taking a look at is Dean Thompson's 2025 Toyota Genuine Parts scheme that we'll see in the Xfinity Series race at Gateway. Looks kind of similar to some of the other Toyota Genuine Parts cars we've seen for Dean Thompson, but I actually do like the look of this car personally. I think it's a nice looking car, and I think that they did a pretty good job on this one. The next paint scheme we're taking a look at is Daniel Suarez's 2025 Choice Hotel scheme that we got this weekend at Gateway. I like the look of this one, to be honest. I think that Trackhouse had some nice looking schemes for sure. I love the waffle look they've done for the week. I think it looks pretty good, and I think they did a pretty solid job overall on this one. The next paint scheme we're taking a look at is Matt DiBenedetto's 2025 IBU scheme that we'll see this weekend at Gateway. I think this is one of the best Viking Motorsports cars we have seen so far this year. The colors on it look really, really good. They really pop for sure, and I think they knocked this one out of the park. The next paint scheme we're taking a look at is Josh Bilicki's 2025 Sugarlands Shine scheme that we'll see in a couple races, including next weekend at Bristol Motor Speedway. I like the look of this car, and I think it's an awesome partnership for the DGM Racing organization. The cars on this one look really, really good, and I think did a pretty solid job on this one. And the final paint scheme we're taking a look at is Kyle Sieg's 2025 Sustain a Chem scheme that we'll see, I believe, this weekend at Gateway. Car looks okay in my opinion. I think the cars on it do look decent for sure. I think this team did a pretty solid job on this one, and I'm looking forward to seeing on the racetrack this weekend in the NASCAR Xfinity Series at Worldwide Technology Raceway. And now we're going to head on to the next story of today's episode as we're talking about the Gateway purses for this weekend. So every time we have a NASCAR Cup, Xfinity, and Truck Series race, Bob Pockrass puts out the purse money for that event. And according to Bob, for the Cup race, it's $9,797,935. And for the Xfinity Series race, it's $1,651,939. Obviously, that Cup purse is likely going to go up a little bit for the teams that basically signed the charter agreement with the preliminary injunction ruling that came out, which, of course, we're going to talk about here in just a short little bit near the end of this episode. I wish the Xfinity numbers were up up for the purses, to be honest, because I think they absolutely need an increase in the purse for sure for the lower series. I know it's not as bad as like the truck series, for example, but I think that number should definitely be up a little bit for sure. I'd like to see an increase on that front going into the future, and I think there's a chance that could change here really, really soon as well. So nonetheless, I think it's pretty interesting. I think the purses for this weekend are solid. They're not spectacular by any stretch of the imagination, but I think they're decent, at least for this weekend at Gateway. And now we're going to head jump on to the next story of today's episode as we're talking about Gateway once again. As was reported by Jeff Gluck, I believe it was on Monday or Tuesday, that Worldwide Technology Raceway will have the same tire they used at Iowa Speedway about a month or so ago at this point. They're going to be using the same right side tire I believe they had. I think the left and the rights are both going to be the same that we saw at Iowa Speedway. If you watch a NASCAR Cup Series race at Iowa Speedway, there was very little tire wear throughout the event, and there was very little passing going on throughout the race. So I am very concerned that we're not probably going to get the most exciting race out on the racetrack, which is a shame because I think that Gateway from time to time, especially with the strategy, I think it's been one of the more interesting races at points over the course of the last couple of years. But we all know, of course, that it's very tough and very, very difficult to pass at that track as well. But I really wish that we were using a different tire for sure for this. I'd like to maybe like seeing a softer tires. I think the racing actually could be really good with a softer tire, so I wish we were using that. But I'm also not surprised we're not using that because I know the Gateway, it likes the harder tires among other things. But I'm not sure this race is going to be good. It may not be the best race. Hopefully it can be a really strong race, but I'm not expecting a great race this weekend at Gateway. And now we're going to head on to the next story of today's episode as we're talking about Tony Stewart. As it was confirmed by the NHRA that Tony Stewart has won the NHRA regular season championship in Pro Stock or in the top class of the NHRA for 2025. What has Tony Stewart not done? He's now won the NHRA regular season championship. He's won multiple races in NHRA. He's won USAC championships. One of the few drivers who's won the USAC Triple Crown. A 3-time NASCAR Cup champion. A NASCAR Hall of Famer. Won the Brickyard 400. An IndyCar champion. The only driver to win the IndyCar and NASCAR championships. Winner of pretty much every big event that you could think of in motorsports altogether, maybe outside of the Indianapolis 500. What Tony Stewart has done as a race car driver over the years is absolutely incredible. And for him to win the NHRA regular season championship, I think that's absolutely phenomenal to see. So nonetheless, congratulations to him on winning the NHRA regular season championship. Tony's had a phenomenal year so far, 2025. He's had a great season when it comes to pace. He's done a fantastic job out on the track this year. And once again, congratulations to Tony on being your champion in the NHRA in 2025 on the regular season side. And I think depending on what happens with the playoff side of things for this year, which I'm not the biggest fan of the NHRA countdown for the championship, I think he will very likely be the guy who could go out there and win the championship in about a month or so from now. And now we're going to head on to the next story of today's episode as we're talking about Bristol Motor Speedway. As last night, Jerry Caldwell, who was speaking to media reporters ahead of the upcoming week at Bristol Motor Speedway next weekend, he has confirmed that Bristol Motor Speedway will have a softer tire for this upcoming week at Bristol Motor Speedway. I like hearing this news for Bristol Motor Speedway, and I'm really, really hoping that it can produce a much more intriguing race than we have seen in the last couple races at the track in particular. Ever since the next-gen car started going to Bristol Motor Speedway, outside of the crazy tire race that we saw in the spring race of 2024, I don't think the racing has actually been that great, to be honest. So I think having a change to the tire and bringing a softer compound, hopefully that can produce great racing. But there's also been times where we've brought a softer tire and there hasn't been a ton of wear. So I'm really, really hoping and praying that with the softer tire that we are going to end up using, it can produce a overall very solid and a really interesting race, because I would like to see Bristol put on a great show like it used to. I remember all the great Bristol races like 2002 when I watched that race a couple times now. Other great Bristol races over the years. I know there's issues with Bristol that need to be fixed. It's not just associated with the tires itself, but the next-gen car is just not put on solid and consistent racing at the track. So I'm hoping that with a new tire coming into play, we can get better racing for sure. But I'm glad that Goodyear's trying. Say what you want to say about Goodyear and some of their issues in the past. It's good that they're trying things to make things a little bit better for sure. And I really am hoping that the racing can be better when we do get out to Bristol next week. I think it could be hopefully a good race, in my opinion. And now we're going to head on to the next story of today's episode as we're talking about Bobby Dale Earnhardt. As it was announced early, I believe Monday afternoon, that Bobby Dale Earnhardt will be returning to ARCA next weekend at Bristol Motor Speedway. Well, at the time, the team had not been confirmed on Monday. It was officially confirmed, I believe, yesterday that Bobby Dale Earnhardt will be driving the number 31 for Rise Motorsports. Bobby Dale Earnhardt, I believe, is the son of Kerry Earnhardt. He, of course, I believe, is a brother of Jeff Earnhardt. Of course, has had a decent career in NASCAR over the years. And Bobby has not made a ton of starts in NASCAR's top 3 divisions. I don't even know if he's made a start in trucks or even Xfinity at this point. Maybe 1 or 2 starts, who knows. But Bobby has won, I think, an ARCA Truck Championship, I'm pretty sure. And now will drive for Rise Motorsports. Now, Rise just picked up, I believe, a top 5 finish not too long ago. And I think that Bobby will probably be one of the better drivers that organization has had in the last couple years. Because when you think of the 31 car, that car is always off the pace and generally struggling out on the racetrack because they don't have some of the top motors that most organizations can get at this point. Now, you're probably going to see people like Cletus up front competing for an opportunity. You're probably going to see, of course, like whoever else is up there, probably the 18, maybe Max Reeves or Brent Cruz at this point who's competing for the win. But I think the goal should be to finish as many laps as possible, stay out of the way, and don't cause an incident crash on the racetrack in your return. But I'm glad to see Bobby Dale Earnhardt back nonetheless. I hope he can do a really, really solid job in the ARCA race at Bristol. It'd be great to see him show some great pace and speed. We'll see if he can do a good job, but nonetheless, happy and glad to see that he is returning to the ARCA series and returning to motorsports in general next weekend at Bristol Motor Speedway. And now we're going to head on to the next story of today's episode as we're talking about Portland Raceway. As it was reported by Adam Stern, I believe late Monday night going into early Tuesday morning, there's been an explanation why NASCAR is no longer returning to Portland Raceway for 2026. He reports, NASCAR officials removed Portland because the track is in need of upgrades for 2026. There apparently wasn't even internet on pit road for officials and people to see on the pit boxes where they couldn't tweet things among anything else. And there's other infrastructure upgrades that are really desperately needed to Portland Raceway currently at the moment. Now, Portland Raceway is expected to return to the IndyCar schedule for 2026. I don't think this is the only reason, though, that Portland Raceway is not on the calendar. I think a big reason why is because it's a standalone event, and while I do think it attracted a decent-sized crowd, which we're going to get to the ratings here in just a short little bit, because the ratings for this weekend's race at Portland for Xfinity were not that great, I will say, but a standalone event doesn't attract a lot, especially for these teams, and I think these teams in NASCAR in particular, they're trying to find a way to save a little bit of money. So while the infrastructure upgrades that are needed, I think it's somewhat of an okay excuse in some way, shape, or form for this. I do believe there's other factors why they're not going back to Portland next year for Xfinity. I don't think it's just because of the infrastructure side of things. I think there's other things that kind of happened at this point where they probably made the decision. So I'm disappointed to see Portland not back on the calendar. I think Portland's put on some pretty decent shows. Yes, Connor Zilisch pretty much dominated the whole entire race, which there was controversy even around that at this point, which I don't think it should have been a big controversy, at least for him in this race. But I think there's other things that kind of happen to cause these issues personally for it. So I think it's interesting for sure. I think it's kind of, again, very interesting nonetheless that they're not going back to Portland. It's disappointing to hear, though. I think Portland is a track, again, that I think could put on a really good show for Cup. I think that part of the country really needs a race for NASCAR. There's so many races in the Southeast that I think expanding across the country, going up to that Northwest area. I know there's been talk about Denver, and NASCAR's talk about going up to Pacific Northwest again in the future because that area really needs a race at this point. So it's disappointing here why they're not going back. But it's also not the most surprising thing, to be honest. I'm not entirely shocked that that is one of the big reasons why they're not going back, in my opinion. And now we're going to head on to the next story of today's episode as we're talking about Cole Raz. As it was announced late Monday afternoon, that Cole Raz will make his NASCAR Xfinity Series debut this weekend at Gateway, also known as Worldwide Technology Raceway. He will drive the number 76 for AM Racing. It is also expected to be confirmed as well that he will run multiple other NASCAR Xfinity Series races throughout the 2025 season. In the number 76 car, I think I saw Kansas won the race that he is going to run. I think I saw Bristol Motor Speedway maybe next weekend as well. And I think I did see Phoenix as another race he is going to run. For those who do not know who Cole Raz has been with AM Racing over the course of the last couple of years. He actually does have, I believe, a couple wins or at least one win in the ARCA West Series, I believe, back in 2024. And in the race that he has ran in 2025, where he's not had equipment issues, he's been able to finish inside the top 5, or at least in the top 5 or 6 general area on pace and speed. So I think that Cole Raz could surprise a lot of people, where I think he could legitimately be a top 20, top 25 threat, because I think AM Racing this year in particular, they've shown some pretty decent speed out on the track with Harrison Burton. Yes, Haley Deegan struggled last year with this team, but I do think that Cole Raz will be someone who can run very solidly, and I think could absolutely run really, really well for sure. I expect him to have some pretty good pace and really strong speed, hopefully. Yes, there is some pretty good competition for this weekend as well, but I think that he has a good opportunity to be really fast and competitive. I hope he can have a strong run with the team and organization. I look for him to do a pretty good job out there. We'll see what he can do, and we'll see if he can have a really strong and really, really great performance with this organization and team. I hope this team can bring the pace and speed for him to be competitive. There's a lot of good competition. You got Corey Day running this weekend. You got Daniel Hemrick back in the field, and you've got some other people, of course, like Connor Zilch, Justin Allgaier, who are going to be going for the win this weekend in the Xfinity Series event. But I really hope he can do a great job. We'll see what he can do, and we'll see if he can bring the pace and speed out on the racetrack this weekend in the Xfinity Series race, the Gateway, and other races throughout the remainder of the season. And now we're going to head on to the next story of today's episode, as we're talking about Drewski. Now, a couple of days ago, there was a lot of talk and a lot of speculation around Drewski maybe being at Darlington Raceway a couple days back doing some sort of skit. And a lot of people were saying, no, there was no way Drewski was out at Darlington. Well, it was confirmed in a video that Drewski posted on his Twitter page and his Instagram page as well. He was confirmed that he was at Darlington Raceway. Now, he was basically doing the shtick of a Southern person who basically is a certain way that I think NASCAR has been trying to move away from over the course of the last couple of years. Really, the last 10 years, I should say, they've been trying to move away from that shtick and go to a more positive way that's not the way that Drewski was portraying it. Now, that being said, the videos I have seen now, Twitter says he got around 85 million views. The views I don't entirely think are completely accurate to how many people actually saw, because the views are calculated by people who move across the Twitter feed. But I will say, though, there probably were a lot of people that actually clicked that video, and that post on Twitter got 600-something thousand likes, one of the most liked NASCAR-associated tweets I think we've ever seen at this point right now. And I do think when you look at it, I still think it's a big deal he was there. I think it was in some sort of association. I think Breakard mentioned this. I think it was in some sort of association with the Monster Energy group. And I think it's a big reason why Drewski was out there in the first place. I really hope that we can see the sport grow with this, and maybe Drewski comes back out to more races in the future. Again, I don't like some of the things they portrayed him around, but at the same time, I think that's more of a thing with Monster Energy than anything else at this point. I think it's so cool that someone like him was out at the racetrack and doing something in association with that. I think it's fascinating for sure, and it's cool nonetheless to see that Drewski was at the track this weekend at Darlington. I think it's very interesting stuff for sure, in my honest opinion. And now we're going to head on to the next story of today's episode, as we're talking about fastest lap. As it was reported by Jeff Gluck, and this is something that was talked about on the Holler Talk podcast as well, NASCAR's communication director Mike Ford apparently said at some point in the podcast that NASCAR is considering making a change for only lead lap cars to score the fastest lap point. And the reason they're talking about this is because Josh Berry going out there and quote-unquote exploiting the rule and having the fastest lap at the end of the day. That 1 point, by the way, put Josh Berry from being 20 points behind to being only 19 points behind. I'll be honest, I really don't understand why NASCAR is considering making a change to the fastest lap rule. Because here's the thing, if it was a playoff point, fine. If you want to change it then, I think I'm okay with that. But it's not a playoff point or even a stage point. It's just a normal point. Just to put this in perspective, Kyle Larson, yes, he had 2 fastest laps or 3 fastest laps throughout the year. That actually helped him finish in 3rd in the regular season standings. And it was just a normal point. It wasn't even a stage point or a playoff point or anything like that. It's just a normal point that helps him when it comes to that. It helps people as well. And I get what NASCAR is thinking, but there's been times this year where we've had very few cars finish on the lead lap. And what happens if you have a guy that finishes up front? How do you calculate that? I think that you're making it way too complicated making the change, and it's going to cause a lot of complications that don't need to be there. I think things need to stay consistent the way it is. I think there's a lot of other things and a lot of things the point system that really need to be changed. I don't think the fastest lap part of it is the thing that needs to change with the sport personally. Most people would agree with me on that. Of course, people like Daniel Trott and others in the industry, shocker that it might be paid by NASCAR at this point, we're defending NASCAR's decision. I just don't agree with it. It makes no sense to me, and I think it'd be a bad decision to go ahead and change the fastest lap rules. I don't think it's necessary, and I don't think it's called for to go ahead and change that rule when it comes to the fastest lap, in my honest opinion. And now we're going ahead and jump on to the next story of today's episode as we're talking about Hendrick Motorsports. As reported by Davis Warren, who I believe is a photographer in the NASCAR industry, it looks like according to him that Hendrick Motorsports has or may have bought the Kawicki shop very recently, and they might be doing some sort of car dealership thing in association with the Kawicki shop currently at the moment. Obviously, a few years ago, Spire Motorsports actually owned that Kawicki shop where they were starting to build up their program, but recently in the last couple of years, they've moved into the KBM shop around 2023 to 2024 when Kyle Busch sold off his program to Spire Motorsports, which of course now Kyle Busch is in association with that team, trying to get that program up to speed as a lot of the KBM stuff is no longer associated with the Spire team currently at the moment right now. I think it's interesting they purchased it though. Obviously, Hendrick Motorsports has a lot of money, but you have Spire, who's probably helped funding that as well currently at the moment with the Gamebird side of things, among other things. You kind of have to look at on that front there. But I think it's cool they've bought the Kawicki shop, and I really hope they do some good things and have some good intentions with that, because I think it could be a really big deal for that shop in particular, right? For that shop to maybe expand and for that shop to potentially grow as well. I think it's a really big deal. Pretty exciting stuff for sure. And I think it's cool they bought the Kawicki shop. Again, I really hope whatever they do to the shop, they don't really screw a lot of things up there. I do hope that there's a lot of positive that does come out for that when it comes to that Kawicki shop. I think there's some pretty cool things that could come from with it. And I think there's a lot of things that can happen to that Kawicki shop that I think could actually be a really big positive, in my honest opinion. And now we're going ahead and jump on to the next story of today's episode as we're talking about Markham. As it was announced a couple days ago, I believe it was on Tuesday, that Markham will host an IndyCar race in the streets of Toronto in the city of Markham in 2026. And according to, I believe, the Archie O'Reilly who's doing a podcast with Dive Bomb, I'm pretty sure, he reports it is a 5-year deal for this track to exist. The track map has come out as well, and I got to say there's some very interesting things around the track map. There is that split pit lane. David Land kind of talked about that, I believe, yesterday as well, around the split pit lane. But there's a lot of opportunities to pass. There's some sort of like really tight corners, which could cause a lot of traffic jams. It kind of looks like similar to Long Beach in some way, shape, or form when they're going around the fountain. And I really hope that with the track, it can produce really good racing. I'm glad to see, though, that they're going to be staying up in Canada in the Ontario area, considering they will not be going to the Exhibition Palace or the Exhibition Place, at least for a few more years at this point. So I'm really hoping with them coming up there, I hope they can stay up there for the long-term future in that area, because I think the fans in Canada deserve a race for IndyCar at this point, because there was talk of them going to Watkins Glen and there not being a Canada race in general for the 2026 year. But I think in general, I think this track does have a lot of intrigue and really exciting things overall. And I think there's a lot of positive that can come from with this. I'm kind of tired of straight course. We need more ovals at this point, considering we do have Washington, D.C. potentially coming on the calendar in August, which this race will be between August 11th and 16th, I believe, of next year, I'm pretty sure. So this is actually August 11th through 14th, I'm pretty sure. So we're not sure when the schedule is going to end, but a lot of races are going to be changing here really soon as well. And I think that it's interesting they'll be racing in the streets of Toronto and once again in that area in 2026. And now we're going ahead and jump on to the next story of today's episode as we're talking about the National IndyCar ratings from this past weekend. And honestly, they are very, very positive. As reported by the Fox Sports team for IndyCar, the IndyCar race at Fox scored 1.142 million viewers for Sunday on Fox. That is up 136% from 2024, where I believe the race had 483,000 viewers, which that race on NBC. Now, granted, there were NFL games that were going on at the time, and of course, for the final race of IndyCar this year, with it being in the last week of August, there was no race that was affected by it, or at least no NFL games except preseason games that were going on at that point. This is a major win. This is only the third time, I believe, this season where over 1 million people tuned into an IndyCar race. Obviously, St. Pete had over 1 million viewers. The Indy 500 had, I believe, over 8 million viewers this year. And the National race had over 1 million viewers. What's interesting is the fact there's people talking about playoffs, among other things, saying, oh, we need a playoff format in IndyCar. And despite the fact that we've had a championship decided multiple weeks ago, the ratings are up in IndyCar, while ratings for NASCAR, which we'll get to in just a little bit, are down. This is a major deal for IndyCar. I believe they said they were up 27% overall from last year on the TV ratings altogether for IndyCar. Now, granted, the ratings before this weekend were not the most exciting for IndyCar, but they went up the last couple weeks compared to the prior year, and a big reason for that is because it's about the racing. People don't care about the championship. The championship is secondary to the whole entire racing itself, and I think that's a reason why the IndyCar ratings were up compared to other times, because I think people just don't care about the championship there as much as I think some people think they do. So I think the IndyCar ratings for Nashville were pretty good in my opinion for IndyCar. I think this is a massive, massive dub for IndyCar. Again, I know they had some inconsistent ratings as of late, but I think they had some pretty good ratings here this weekend. I think there's some pretty exciting ratings overall in general, and I think it's good nonetheless to see that we got some pretty decent and good ratings for the IndyCar race this past weekend at Nashville. I think it's a big win for the IndyCar series, and I think it's good to see the ratings be up for the weekend, in my opinion. And now we're going to head on to the next story of today's episode, as we're talking about the TV ratings for NASCAR this past weekend. And honestly, the ratings for this past weekend are absolutely atrocious and terrible. As Jeff Gluck reported, I believe it was on Wednesday afternoon, that the Southern 500 scored 1.88 million viewers. That is down from 2.4 million in 2024, a 22% decrease. For the Xfinity Series and Truck Series, this is where it gets worse. For Xfinity, which again, there were a lot of college football games going on at that point, there were only 733,000 people on average that tuned into the Xfinity Series race. That is the least watched Xfinity Series race, I believe, of the 2025 season. And for the Craftsman Truck Series, they only scored 262,000 viewers, and once again, there were a lot of college football games going on. Again, I think the Xfinity Series and Truck Series being down is not the most shocking and surprising, because I mentioned the college football side of things. We have a lot of college football games going on. I think that's a big reason why the ratings are down for the Xfinity Series and Truck Series this time around. However, for the Southern 500, they were down 22% for 2024. In fact, this is the least watched Southern 500 on record. That is not acceptable. For a rate, I know it's cable, for crying out loud, but there were streaming races this year for, like, I believe Nashville and I believe Mexico City and a couple other races this year that had over 2.5 million viewers, or over 2 million viewers for the event. And streaming did better than this. And I think the TV networks and the TV production probably played a role in the ratings being down. But we've had multiple races this year now in the Cup Series on USA that have had under 2 million. I think like 3 or 4 races since we've come back to USA this year have gone down this year and have a big drop. That's not good. Again, the playoff format plays a major role in this. I think that's the only reason why it's down so much, because there's so much playoff fatigue. There's people getting tired of the lawsuit conversations, which again we got to talk about here in just a short little bit. The ratings are just not acceptable. They're terrible in my opinion. They are absolutely horrendous numbers, I think, for this year, unfortunately, for this year, Southern 500, which is kind of shocking to see them down, but I'm disappointed to see it as well. As I'd like to see the numbers be up a little bit, and I think the numbers should be higher than what we've seen at this point currently at the moment. I think they're very disappointing for sure. While IndyCars go up, NASCARs go down. Again, I think there's a pretty clear reason why it's gone down, and I think it's disappointing to see nonetheless that this year's Southern 500 ratings are absolutely atrocious and terrible for this year. And now we're going to head on to the next story of today's episode, as we're talking about Rinus VeeKay. As it was confirmed, I believe, on Tuesday, that Rinus VeeKay will not return to Dale Coyne Racing in IndyCar in 2026. He will once again not drive the number 18 car next year. This is a little bit not surprising. There's been some talk and conversations that Rinus VeeKay has been looking for an upgrade going into the 2026 year. Now, where can Rinus VeeKay end up in 2026? Well, there is a lot of speculation on a couple organizations. I know David Lamb brought up potential possibility of Juncos Hollinger Racing taking over one of the Juncos Hollinger Racing seats. There's unknown about whether Connor Daly is going to return to the Juncos Hollinger Racing team in 2026, despite the fact that Connor Daly has had some solid runs, especially on the ovals this year. I'm not sure if he is going to return to that organization next season. The team that I do believe he'll end up, though, is at AJ Foyt Racing. AJ Foyt Racing would be a really solid organization to go to, with Dave Malukas, of course, expected to be going over to the number 12 car next season, which we're going to talk about here in a little bit at this point. but I am not surprised to see that he's out because I think that Dale Coyne Racing, while they're a solid organization, I think that Rinus is a better driver than what Dale Coyne has provided. Now, who takes over that car? I would expect that Roman Grosjean is going to take that seat. There's been a lot of talk. Roman wants to come back to IndyCar, and he's the favorite currently at the moment to take that seat at this point. But I hope for Rinus he does get an upgrade going into 2026 and can be very fast and really competitive with this whatever team he goes to. I think he's got a great chance and opportunity to be competitive with other organizations he ends up going to next year. And I hope he can do a great job with a team like AJ Foyt Racing in 2026. And now we're going ahead and jump on to the next story of today's episode as we're talking about Rodney Childers. Now, Rodney Childers was asked a question about what is going on with him currently at the moment for 2026 and whether he does have anything signed as of yet for 2026 on the crew chiefing side of things. Well, Rodney Childers is hoping for a return to NASCAR and would like to be a crew chief in NASCAR once again and doing the things he wanted to do, being like a leader among other people at this point. But if I'm not able to make a return to NASCAR, I hope I do get an opportunity in something in the not-so-distant future. Hearing that Rodney Childers still does not have anything lined up fully currently at the moment right now is definitely really disappointing to hear because Rodney Childers, yes, he's not been as strong in the next-gen era because I don't think he's been as applicable with the next-gen era side of things, but Rodney Childers is Rodney Childers, right? He is a fantastic crew chief. He's won a lot of races with a lot of different drivers like David Rudiman and Kevin Harvick, been competitive with Mark Martin, won with Brian Vickers, and won with a lot of other drivers, was competitive with other drivers like Scott Riggs as well. It would be incredibly foolish if Rodney Childers is not in the Cup Series in some way, shape, or form. If I'm a team, I'd be looking at a team like Trackhouse at this point and going to work with Connor Zilisch. I think Connor Zilisch is going to need a veteran guidance to really help him get up to speed for 2026. Unless you put Darian Grubb as a crew chief for Connor, which I think is certainly possible, I think that Rodney would absolutely fit the mold to be with them. And Trackhouse would absolutely pay a lot of money to give Rodney Childers the opportunity to work, and they would give him a chance to build up that relationship with Connor, because I think that's what Connor is going to need. I don't think he needs a young crew chief like a Steven Duran. I think he needs a veteran crew chief like a Rodney Childers, who I think Rodney is a pretty big fan of Connor Zilisch too at this point, so it would make a ton of sense for him to work with him next season, which I would expect Trackhouse will be announcing some of that stuff here for 2026 here in the coming weeks. But I think Rodney deserves to be in the Cup Series. It's a shame that he's still not found anything at this point for next year. I think, again, he should absolutely get the opportunity to work with a driver like Connor. Connor is really talented and really good. And to me, I think we need someone like him to come in and get things up with the Trackhouse team. Plus, he could really help Trackhouse get better because that team's been extremely inconsistent in recent years. And I think that they need someone who can be a veteran that can get that team in tip-top shape and get in a really good position as well. So we'll see what happens for him, but I really hope Rodney Childers is able to find a way to work with an organization in the 2026 year. And now we're going to jump on to the next story of today's episode as we're talking about Colton Herta. As it was officially announced and confirmed yesterday that Colton Herta will not return to IndyCar in the 2026 year, and instead will be headed to Formula One, and we headed to the Formula One route in the 2026 season, as it was confirmed yesterday that Colton Herta will become the test driver for Cadillac Formula One in the 2026 season. While nothing's been announced and confirmed on a Formula 2 program for next year, many do expect, and it was put in the press release as well, that the rest of the year statement that they mentioned, they will announce Colton Herta's plans on the racing side of things at a later date for 2026. While nothing's been confirmed as of now, a lot of people are speculating that Colton is going to drive a Prema Formula 2 car in 2026. This is a really, really exciting deal, and I think it's finally happening where Colton Herta is going to the Formula One route. I think Colton Herta is talented enough that I think he's earned the right and opportunity to go the Formula One route. He's better than certain drivers in that world currently at the moment, and he could be in line in the future to replace a driver like Valtteri Bottas or Sergio Perez, most likely Sergio Perez at this point, because I think the long-term future for Cadillac is going to be someone like a Colton Herta or even someone like a Jack Crawford at this point. It is going to be sad to see Colton not in IndyCar, even at the Indy 500. There was talk about it maybe run the Indy 500 next year, but that's not going to be happening with his focus focus on being in the Formula One world now. But I think this is a great day for the IndyCar to see someone as talented as Colton get the chance and opportunity to move into that world next season. I think he's going to be phenomenal with that program on the testing side of things. He was fast according to what people were saying. He was actually quicker than Kimi Räikkönen a couple years back when he was testing for Sauber a few years ago. So I think that Colton will be very, very strong and pretty competitive there. And I think he's got a great chance and opportunity to show some great things in Formula 2. I think Colton's a great driver. I think it's a fantastic day for motorsports altogether. Just happy and great to see that Colton Herter will get the chance and opportunity to head over to out of the IndyCar world, head over to Cadillac. While it's a bittersweet day for IndyCar fans, I think it's a exciting day for motorsports fans and fans in the U.S. in general to see that Colton is going to be headed to that Formula One ladder starting in 2026. And now we're going to head on to the next story of today's episode as we're talking about Will Power. Now, we do have a two-parter to talk about in this video around Will Power. It was announced, of course, on Tuesday morning, as expected, that Will Power will not be returning to Team Penske in the 2026 season, as Will Power, according to what the team said in a statement, left the organization on his own terms. Now, obviously, Will Power was not allowed to talk to other organizations and teams until the end of the season. I'm going to say this, I am not surprised to see that Will Power is no longer at Team Penske next year. The way that the team and organization handled Will Power's contracting situation, I think they handled this very, very bad, and they treated Will Power very unfairly in regards to the contract situation with Team Penske. So I'm not surprised that Will Power got fed up with the situation that happened over there. We'll talk about his replacement here in just a second. With Will Power no longer being in Team Penske next year, where is he going to go in 2026? Well, it was announced yesterday that Will Power will be headed to Andretti Global in 2026 to drive the number 26 car. This, in my opinion, is a massive pickup. He'll take over the 26 from Colton Herta and will have Gainbridge sponsorship as well throughout the season. I was just thinking about this. We could see Will Power maybe in a Spire truck, considering the association with TWG. We could see Will Power in a truck at some point. But this is an upgrade, in my opinion, a little bit over Colton Herta. I think Colton Herta was a great driver, but I think this is an upgrade over Colton on the IndyCar side of things, because the only driver to win a championship under the Alex Palou era that's not named Alex Palou in the last 5 years is Will Power in 2022, and Will Power is one of the most successful drivers in IndyCar history, period, end of story. So I think he is going to do a phenomenal job next year with Andretti Global. I think he actually will be a legitimate championship contender because he's not just good at street courses, but he's good at road courses. He's also very, very good at ovals as well, which is something that Andretti's kind of struggled at times. So I think that having someone like him come in will make that program stronger and make that program better. And I think that is a very solid lineup they've got going into next year. I think we'll also have a good chance to win the Indy 500 next season. I look for that to be very, very competitive because I know he's not been a strong in Indy, but I think that will be a great running spot for him. Now, who takes over for him next year? It's expected to be Dave Malukas. I know there's been talk about Rinus VeeKay from what some people are saying, but I don't take much into that rumor. I think that Rinus VeeKay will go to AJ Foyt, and I think Dave Malukas will take over that seat next year. I don't really consider him a major upgrade at this point, to be honest, but I do think that you'll see Will Power go over there, which we know is confirmed, and I think you see Dave Malukas take over the 12, which I think is going to get confirmed in the coming days, and I think will get announced here pretty soon that you are going to see him end up moving up there in the 2026 season to move over to that organization in 2026. And now we're going to head on to the next story of today's episode as we're talking about Richard Petty. Now, Richard Petty recently did a 12 questions poll and thing with Jeff Gluck on The Athletic and was asked a question around his thoughts on playoffs and stages in NASCAR. Well, put another person down who is not a fan of this current playoff format at this point. Richard Petty says he is not a fan of playoffs in NASCAR or is not a fan of stages either. He thinks it's a massive, massive gimmick, and he doesn't like a lot of changes that NASCAR is making currently at the moment, especially for the future at this point. Again, like I mentioned a second ago, this is another person who's either retired or current at this point who is not a big fan of the playoff format in some way, shape, or form. Now, I'll start with my opinion on the stages side of things. I do agree that there are issues with the stages in NASCAR. I think that awarding points throughout the race actually is a really good decision. I think the only thing that needs to change with that, You get rid of the cautions. I think the cautions need to go. I think that's one thing that absolutely does need to change currently at the moment with the system that NASCAR has at this point. So I think that's the big thing that does need to be turned on and go away is the stage yellows. I think how they did it in road courses was fine. I don't know why they brought them back, to be honest, because I think if you get rid of stages, I think it will make strategy more interesting and more exciting as well. But the playoffs, yes. I am with Richard Petty on this. I think it is clear as day by what people are saying that there need to be major changes with NASCAR on that front. I think the playoff format is way too gimmicky. I think there's major fundamental issues with this playoff format currently at the moment right now, and I think there's a lot that absolutely needs to change with it. If we're going to keep the playoffs in some way, shape, or form, I think the chase format would be the best way to go about it, to go back to the original chase or have the 12 drivers in. You don't have winning your in. You can still reward the playoff points for like seeding, among other things, but you can't lock your way in. I think winning your in needs to go. I don't think a driver should be able to lock a spot in just by winning a race. I think there's things that need to change on that front on a personal thing, and I really think that the playoffs itself, there's major issues, and I think you need to make your own identity with that. I don't think you need playoffs to be associated with that. I think you can take away the playoff side of things and get rid of that in general and in a nutshell. But I'm glad to see Richard Petty saying something about this because I've had issues with this system for many years. Again, I think winning you're in is a major fundamental flaw and major issue with this system currently at the moment. And I think winning you're in is one of those big things that does absolutely and desperately needs to go away. And I really hope it does go away in the future because I don't want to see the playoffs continue the way they are. NASCAR's talk about changing. It doesn't sound like they're going to make any massive changes at this point for the 2026 year. But I really hope there are some big changes coming in the future so we can get rid of this playoff format the way they have, and maybe by 27 we'll have big changes, but I'm not sure we'll have any major changes, at least for 2026, which is really disappointing to see. And now we're going ahead and jump on to the next story of today's episode as we're talking about Austin Cindric. Now, it was originally reported by Speed Cafe, I believe it was on late Monday morning going into Tuesday or going into Wednesday, that Austin Cindric was expected to run a supercar race in the Adelaide Grand Final, but nothing was officially confirmed. Well, as you saw in the video yesterday that I did, it was confirmed that Austin Cindric will in fact compete in a supercar race at the Adelaide Grand Final as he'll drive for Tickford Racing in the event. He will be the first NASCAR driver to kind of do the thing and go run in the supercar series. Obviously, we have seen a lot of drivers in supercar world come over and race in NASCAR. Shane Van Gisbergen being the prime example, who now has 5 career NASCAR Cup Series wins, including 4 wins in 2025, and very likely more might get another win for the end of the year with the Charlotte Roval coming up in about 4 or 5 weeks from now. We've also seen drivers like Will Brown come over and race in a couple starts. We've seen Cam Waters come in and run some Truck Series starts and a Select Cup Series start or 2. And now they're talking about bringing some sort of Truck Series competition to supercars in the future and a Gen 3 series at this point. And then, of course, you do have other drivers who've come over like Brody Kosecki and Jack Perkins, and even rumors of Brock Feeney coming over and racing as well to race in the series. I think this is an amazing opportunity for Austin Cindric. Now, apparently some people mention this. He actually has done some testing for when Penske had a program when Scott McLaughlin was competing full-time in supercars. For Scott McLaughlin, of course, went over to be a full-time driver in IndyCar starting in 2021. They had a program set up and Cindric got the chance and opportunity to test. Now, while Austin Cindric's numbers at road courses in NASCAR have not been as strong, at least on the Cup Series side of things, I think that he is a pretty solid driver when it comes to road course racing in a nutshell in general, and I would expect that Cindric will be pretty solid and pretty competitive for sure in this event for sure. But he's going to have some good competition, right? You're going to have people like Thomas Randall competing who've been competitive. You're going to have Chaz Moster who's been extremely competitive. Brock Feeney who's a championship threat this year. Will Brown who's a championship threat this year. Other big names, of course, like Brody Kosecki, who's competing full-time with Erebus currently at the moment, and other people in the Chevy, Ford, and other camps as well. But I really love to see that a guy like Cindric is coming in. Now, I mentioned he will drive for Tickford Racing in these events. The other big thing to note as well with this is that, again, there will be some other stuff that happens. Of course, there was talk about Kyle Busch and Kyle Larson competing in this event. Obviously, of course, it is not happening for 2026, unfortunately. But I really hope in the future those are 2 of the drivers who do get an opportunity to race in supercars in the future. I would also love to see like a Chase Sully go out and do it. I'd love to see a guy like maybe, I don't know, like a Connor Zilic go and run a supercar race in the future. I'd love to see other drivers come and do that in the future as well, like a Brad Keselowski, like a Chris Buescher. I think that'd be amazing. I'd love to see like a Brent Cruz get a chance and opportunity to run a supercar race in the future, because a lot of the things from the next gen car are very similar to the supercar platform in some way, shape, or form. So I really hope Cinder can be competitive in the supercar event in Adelaide. I think it's going to be tough for him to be a major favorite for the win, but I think he's got a great opportunity to be competitive and fast. I hope he can do a really strong job and run very, very well, and we'll see if in the future he can be competitive. But it's pretty cool that Austin will get the chance and opportunity to run the Adelaide Grand Final. We'll see if he can be competitive next year at the end of the year in the Adelaide Grand Final. And now we're going ahead and jump on to the first of two major stories in today's episode, as we're doing a little bit of a NASCAR silly season update. Now, on the most recent Door Bumper Clear podcast that came out earlier this week, there's some talk about some drivers and some teams that could be making some really interesting moves for the 2026 season. Now, one really quick thing we'll talk about here is Brent Cruz. Freddie Kraft does mention that Brent Cruz is expected to potentially move up to the NASCAR Xfinity Series full-time in 2026, which, of course, will have the O'Reilly Auto Parts as a full-time sponsorship for the 2026 year. Brent Cruz will turn 18, I believe, in March of 2026, and Brent Cruz being touted as a potential replacement for Denny Hamlin in the next couple of years. Brent, in my opinion, very talented young driver who I think has a ton of potential currently at the moment to be very successful in the sport, and I really would love to see someone like a Brent Cruz get that chance and opportunity to be full-time next year. I think JGR would be a great opportunity landing spot. That's where a lot of people are expecting Brent Cruz to end up in 2026, is maybe a full-time gig at that point. But there's two other big things they talked about going into 2026. The first one revolves around the Haas factory team. Now, a couple weeks ago, we've been hearing a lot of rumors and speculation around the Haas factory team. Originally, it was reported that the Haas factory team had a deal lined up with Legacy Motor Club for 2026, where they would switch their program to Toyota team in 2026, where they either would be around as a Toyota team or would get their program absorbed for 2026, and Legacy would be able to get that third charter that way for 2026, as the litigation is still going on with Rick Ware Racing at this point for the 2026 year. However, according to Freddie Kraft in recent weeks, things have changed and that deal has fallen through. And according to Freddie Kraft has heard, it sounds like Haas factory team won't be going to Toyota, but according to him, it sounds like Haas factory team may be switching over to Chevrolets in the 2026 year. If the Haas factory team is to switch over to Chevrolet, this would not just affect their NASCAR Cup Series program for next year, but it would also affect their NASCAR Xfinity Series program, because if I'm not mistaken, there is a lot of unknowns with this. There's only 3-4 teams currently at the moment. You, of course, have the Haas factory team currently at the moment. You have RSS Racing, and you have AM Racing. But AM Racing and RSS Racing get their stuff from the Haas factory team. If the Haas factory team is a switch to Chevrolet, like it's been rumored for at least a little bit, this would have a major effect on that program, and it would affect the pipeline for Ford, and you would only have two teams that would be in the Ford camp. Now, this is not the first time we've seen a situation like this. They talked about us on the podcast recently. But basically, of course, there were two teams. I think it was as Stewart Haas Racing and Team Penske were the only two cars on the racetrack with the Ford camp back in like the late 2010s. So it's not uncommon to see only two cars from the Ford camp out there. Now, big question is, if the Haas factory team does end up going over to Chevrolet, what does it mean for Chevrolet that created Sam Mayer? Would they go back into the Chevrolet pipeline? Would they have some association with RCR? I'm not sure if Chevrolet Cree wants to have association with RCR with the way things handled. Would they move to different teams? I think that's a big question at this point right now. But I do think that there is a possibility that those two drivers will be looking for new seats going into 2026. There is a chance, though, that there could be a 14 that comes in. There was talk about Team Penske potentially bringing back their Xfinity Series program. I've heard rumors of Carson Quaffle maybe going over to that program. I know there's been talk that Carson is going to stay with Junior Motorsports for next year. If Penske does bring a program in, though, I would not be shocked or surprised if you see Carson Quaffle go over to Ford, and that may be where RSS and AM Racing get their stuff. Could AM and those teams switch maybe to Chevrolet? Who knows at this point? But right now, I think there's a lot of questions around that team going into next year and what manufacturer they are going to run. The other big news is what's going on with the number 7 car for next season. Right now, there's a lot of talk in the industry that Justin Haley will not return to Spire Motorsports in 2026, as Spire may not keep him in that car for next year, despite the fact they took away his crew chief and took away everything else with that team, the pit crew, and other things get sculpted up by other organizations. It sounds like that the patience at Spire is maybe not very high at this point with Justin Haley right now, and it sounds like they may be looking to make a big move for next year. According to what's been reported by Jordan Bianchi, Ricky Stenhouse Jr. and Daniel Suarez are the two front runners to be the potential replacement for Justin Haley next season. Now, Ricky Stenhouse Jr. has come out and said that he has a contract with Hayek Motorsports for the 2026 year, and then unless if they tell him otherwise, they will not make a move on Stenhouse, which I will say that a buyout could potentially happen. It would have to happen on that contract, which Spire Motorsports, they do have a ton of money with the Gamebridge money, among other things, where they could absolutely make a move on Ricky Stenhouse Jr. But as of now, I would expect Ricky Stenhouse Jr. at this moment to stay with Hayek Motorsports. Now, Daniel Suarez would be the other option. And when I'm looking at Daniel Suarez, compare that to Justin Haley. On the brand recognition side of things, yeah, it would make a lot of sense. Daniel Suarez has a bigger brand at this point and does bring a bigger following. Justin Haley, no disrespect, doesn't bring a massive following. But when you look at performance on the racetrack, I would absolutely take Justin Haley over Daniel Suarez. I know Daniel Suarez has more top 10s than Justin Haley this season. I think Haley's got 3 or 4, while Daniel Suarez has 6 this season. But Daniel Suarez has also been in a Trackhouse racing car. And I think that Trackhouse is a little bit of an upgrade over Spire currently at the moment right now. And I don't expect Suarez to get in that 7 car and do a lot better. I personally think that if you are a driver like Daniel Suarez, you should be looking at other options. But let's say that something happens where Stenhouse does, in fact, go over to Spire. You could move Daniel Suarez, let's just say, over the 47 car, where that car's been having some funding issues and some funding problems as of late, and it would make a lot of sense with Kroger no longer being there, with Suarez having a ton of sponsorship backing with him at this point. It would make a ton of sense right now for Daniel Suarez to go over to the 47, then go over to the 7, because you're not going to get better performances. I personally think that Justin Haley should get another year, because while I think Suarez and Stenhouse would do maybe a little better in that car, I think it's not Justin Haley's fault performance hasn't been as high, and I think it would be pretty foolish for them to move on against Justin Haley at this point. Again, it'll be a decision that the team has to make for next year. We'll kind of find out what happens with that organization soon, but nonetheless, it'll be a story to watch out for as time goes on with what happens to the organization Aspire, what moves they decide to make for the 2026 season on that program, and who will take over that 7 or who will stay in that 7 car next season. And now we're going to jump on to the final major story of today's episode, as we have another NASCAR update once again between 2311, Spire Motorsports, and NASCAR as well. We did a video covering the story on the channel yesterday and some of the smaller details, but as expected, Judge Kenneth Bell has confirmed yesterday that he has denied the preliminary injunction for 2311 and Spire Motorsports, and they have lost their charters for the remainder of the 2025 season. He has denied the motion for the team, like I said, meaning that the charters will be gone for the organization for the remainder of 2025. Now, Judge Kenneth Bell did say in the ruling that he put out that if a new charter is granted to another organization or team, he would grant the charters number 37 and 40. The reason that Judge Kenneth Bell has denied the preliminary injunction motion to 2011 in front row is because of some new rules that NASCAR made in their preliminary injunction ruling, or what they basically put out in this over the weekend, saying that they do not plan to sell any of the charters that 2011 and Front Row Motorsports owns until litigation is resolved at the end of this year, which there is a chance that that could get resolved. It also could get moved to 2026 with appeals, among other things as well, if the court allows it at the point. Now, if the teams end up winning the lawsuit overall, like I mentioned, there is a very realistic chance they will be able to get their charters back for the remainder of the 2026 year and get those charters back very, very quickly as well. And there was a lot of talk about irreparable harm among driver contracts, mainly Tyler Reddick. There's been a lot of talk that Tyler Reddick could end up leaving 2011 at the end of the year if he doesn't have a charter promise. Also, sponsors could leave as another thing that's been brought up in regards to that. The judge did say that if 2011 Front Row do in fact end up losing the lawsuit, they basically would get a lot of damages payback if they end up winning the lawsuit. And there has been responses, of course, with 2011 in Front Row Motorsports, where 2011 in Front Row kind of had at least a thing, said we appreciate the clarity from Judge Kenneth Bell on that side of things. This does not have a full effect on the lawsuit altogether, and we now know what the plan is going forward, at least until the trial ends up taking place. NASCAR has also released their own statement, which they haven't really released a lot of statements in regards to this lawsuit, but they basically were really happy with the decision that Judge Kenneth Bell made, being really proud of the decision, and it feeling like a win for themselves at this point. After NASCAR made those rule changes as of recently in regards to the lawsuit, I am not surprised or shocked to see that Judge Kenneth Bell ruled the way that he did in regards to the 2011 and front row side of things, because when NASCAR said they were not going to be selling the charters, I think that really was the big turning point for that side of things. If NASCAR had decided to go ahead and sell a charter, which there was a lot of talk and speculation that they were going to sell a charter to an unknown team and organization, there's been a ton of speculation in recent weeks that that could have potentially been someone like a Dale Earnhardt Jr. perhaps in Junior Motorsports could have been that team. It could have been a team like RFK who needs a third charter with the situation with Ryan Preece and the unknowns at this point. And I think we'll get to that here in just a little bit on the 37-4s. I think that's actually a really important point on the situation. But there is a chance they could get those charters back if they win the whole lawsuit altogether. But it's not just that. If 27 and Front Row do win the case altogether, a lot of things could end up happening. You could have potential. There's been talk about splits. I think Jeff Gluck brought it up when speaking to people yesterday, which I gotta say, a split would be absolutely horrendous. I don't think anybody wants a split at this point, and I think it'd be awful if a split happened in the sport in general. But I think that this decision, again, is not surprising or shocking. But like I've already said, there is a very realistic possibility that 27 and Front Row could get their charters back here very, very soon as well. And I think there's a potential possibility on that front in the future that that could end up happening. But let's go to the other side of things. What happens potentially to expansion? Because as I mentioned, there is a potential possibility of more charters coming into play. NASCAR does have 4 charters in provision where they could sell them to another organization and could have another team come into play, where NASCAR would then, let's just say, might have to expand the fields. Because NASCAR does have provision with the manufacturers, with Dodge rumored to be coming to Cup, which it sounds like that they're going to be in Cup as early as 2027 or even 2028 at the latest at this point. You have an opportunity, if a new manufacturer comes in, where you can have more charters on the market at this point. And I think NASCAR could absolutely do that right now, where they may make that big move, where NASCAR could activate that provision, where they may just hand those charters out for free at this point and not charge anything, which I think Junior Motorsports would be a team that could absolutely take one of those charters going into next year, I think, or in the future, which I know Junior Motorsports has expressed interest, but again, the charters are a big reason why Dale Jr. has not made the move in the first place to go full-time NASCAR Cup Series racing at this point. But I do think in regards to this litigation, this decision, like I said already, it is really not surprising, unfortunately. I know if 27 in Front Row, I know they're probably not the most happy about the decision, but now the big focus for them is going to be this trial. And Judge Kenneth Bell has stated multiple times that if everything comes out and all the dirty laundry comes out on both sides, it's going to get ugly. And you've got people like Dan Towers who basically said that they don't trust the sanctioning body right now. We know Spire is one of the new age owners and one of the new age teams coming in, and now you've got people in those side of things that are really a little bit untrustworthy of the sanctioning body currently at the moment. And there's a lot of things that are going negative for that. Now, one big thing to know, and the other thing to know that we talk about the charter purses, NASCAR is going to give more of that purse money out starting next week, I believe, at Bristol. So expect that purse money to increase because all the teams in the charter litigation will get all the money back. NASCAR will get all the money back that 27 and Front Row have earned throughout the season so far. They are expected to have to pay that back out. If, of course, they do win the lawsuit altogether, 27 and Front Row, then they basically will be able to get all that back. But things are going to continue to get ugly, and you're probably going to have more spats back and forth. Again, I don't think an appeal is coming out from this, judging by the responses from 27 and Front Row in their camp at this point. I do not expect there to be any updates going forward on that in the future, where I just don't see there being any way where we're going to see another appeal situation. We only got 9 races left in the season. We're near the end of the year. There's no way Tyler Reddick is going to walk. There's no way these drivers are going to walk before the end of the year. If 27 Front Row do, in fact, end up winning the lawsuit, they won't have to worry about the drivers going away. But if 27 Front Row do lose the suit, those teams could be going under at this point. And I think there's a very big question on that, what will happen there at this this point. But we'll be keeping an update on this lawsuit as time progresses and goes on. I think there's some big changes and some big stuff that will probably come from this, from Discovery, but I think we're all waiting what happens in less than 90 days. Keep in mind, we're 88 days from the trial at this point, so we're less than 3 months from that. I think some big things will continue to surface in regards to the lawsuit going forward, and we'll be keeping an update as time goes on in regards to the lawsuit between 25 Front Row, and we could have a big announcement on that here really soon as well. So, that is our today's long NASCAR news and motorsports news episode. I want to thank you guys for watching. Please subscribe to the channel, notifications on, so if I win a video, it does go live on my channel. Follow me on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram, and support me on Patreon as well. Let's go below that and comment your thoughts below on today's episode. Who do you think takes over the 7 if Justin Haley does return next year? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. What thoughts about 23 Front Row losing their charters for the remainder of the season? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. And what thoughts about other stories we talk about today on the channel, the IndyCar world? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. If any other major news breaks later today, we'll discuss it live on the channel. Tomorrow, we're probably going to have a silly season update dropping on the channel. We also very likely will have the paint skin video dropping tomorrow as well. Then on Saturday, we're going to have some special video potentially dropping, and we'll also, of course, have reactions to the Xfinity Series race and Cup qualifying. And then, of course, on Sunday, we'll have the starting lineup video for the Enjoy Illinois 300, and we'll have the Cup review as well for the event. And then, of course, on Monday, we should have a NASCAR news video dropping on the channel as we head to Bristol, and we should have an intros video potentially dropping on Tuesday. We'll have to kind of wait and see what happens there on that front. And we got a lot of content coming up. People like Haley Deegan, Shane Van Gisbergen, Carl Edwards, Kurt Busch, Kyle Busch, Bubba Wallace, Ross Chastain, Sheldon Creed, Sam Mayer, Frankie Muniz, Cletus Farm, Dodge Ram, Colic Racing, Junior Motorsports, Connor Zillich, other people like Kyle Larson, Chase Elliott, you name it, all the good stuff to talk about on the channel in the coming days and coming weeks as well. So anyways, like I said, I want to thank you guys for watching today's episode. I'll see you guys next time for more great, awesome NASCAR content and other motorsports content on the channel like this. Take care, buddy.